You're listening to Self-Compassion, an optimal living interview with Kristin Neff and Brian Johnson.
Hi, this is Brian. Welcome back to the Optimal Living interview series. Today, I am so excited to be with Kristin Neff. Kristin wrote Self-Compassion, subtitled The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. She's one of the world's leading researchers on the science of self-compassion. It's fascinating, the studies that she shares in her great book. She got her PhD at UC Berkeley. I dropped out of law school up at Berkeley. So I appreciated that. You got your PhD right when I was starting law
Right.
school at Bolt. But she studied moral development at Berkeley, and now she's an associate professor in human development at the University of Texas at Austin. Brene Brown raves about you and your work, which is how I discovered self-compassion. And again, I'm such a huge fan of it, particularly as a guy, evolving and really learning how to have compassion for myself and those around me. So I appreciate you taking the time today, and I appreciate the fact that you've dedicated your life to such important work. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for that wonderful send up.
Well, let's jump straight in. Tell us, what is self-compassion?
What is self-compassion? Well, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is it's really treating yourself with the same kindness, care, and concern that you show to a good friend when your friend was struggling in some way or feeling inadequate or experienced some failure. Now, typically, we treat our friends much more kindly than we treat ourselves. We're often harsher, crueler even to ourselves than anyone else in our lives. And so with self-compassion, we turn that around and treat ourselves with kindness and tenderness as well. So that's kind of the shorthand version. And in fact, when most people start looking into, well, how do they speak to the people they care about in their lives when they're struggling and how they speak to themselves, they're kind of shocked at how huge the difference is. So that's the short answer. The longer answer is Neff's 3-component model of self-compassion, which I published back in 2003. But I think the model is important because it really outlines the essential components of self-compassion. So the first is, well, similar to what I just talked about, being kind to yourself versus harshly judgmental. And there's also an action element to self-compassion in that compassion is, well, concern with the alleviation of suffering, but also the motivation to do something about it. Compassion has a motivational element. So with self-compassion, that means when we're upset or we're suffering in some way, we'll actively soothe, comfort ourselves, or help and support ourselves to make a change if we need it. So that's kind of the most salient aspect of self-compassion, but there are two other pieces that are really, really important. One is common humanity, right? Which is basically just remembering that all people are imperfect and everyone leads imperfect lives. And this sounds like it's so obvious, even a child knows this, and yet what happens is when something difficult happens, we struggle or we fail at something, there's this feeling that something has gone wrong, right? That this shouldn't be happening. As if baseline should be everything is going perfectly, and when I failed or I get that diagnosis, something has gone wrong. And that sense that something has gone wrong creates a really powerful sense of abnormality and isolation from the rest of the world who are kind of presumably living normal, happy lives, right? And it's just me who's failed or just me who's had this horrible thing happen. So with self-compassion, what you do is you just remember, well, suffering and failure and imperfection is part of life. It's what connects me to other people as opposed to what separates me. So that's really key. And then the last component is mindfulness. There's been a lot of talk and research into mindfulness lately. So mindfulness really is a way of relating toward our experience in an accepting manner, basically without resisting it or just being, locked into wishing it would go away or wishing it would be different. So when we're looking at our own pain, and especially our pain caused by some mistake we made or some failure, we need to be able to turn toward it and acknowledge it and hold it in our awareness in order for us to respond with compassion. Right? If we spend all our time just blaming other people or trying to problem solve or hiding from ourselves, we aren't going to be able to treat ourselves with the kindness we'd treat a good friend. So really, those three components are essential from my point of view: kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for both the short intro and the longer extended. It's so good. And I want to talk a little bit more about each of those three aspects of what self-compassion means. And I
Mhm.
just want to start by saying that common humanity, that one in particular, really helped me personally see
Mhm.
how I've evolved. It gave me language to see how I've evolved. Because before,
Yeah,
when I was in my really deep perfectionistic, self-critical mode, that was what was missing most fundamentally for me. Was that I thought that I was the only one, and something was inherently wrong with me
that's
because
right.
I experienced this. And that phrase, common humanity, is such a beautiful entry point to um, the broader sense of compassion, both in general and then specifically with ourselves. So
That's
I'd love for you
right.
just to describe that some more, if you could.
Well, I could tell a little story, if you'd like, about a time when common humanity became very powerful to me. I recognized it very powerfully, and it made a huge difference. So my son is autistic, and he was about 3 years old, and at that point, I'd been practicing self-compassion for, gosh, quite a while, maybe 7 or 8 years. And we were at the park together playing on the swings, and there was lots of other mothers and their children there at the park. And, all the other kids were happy and laughing and chasing and interacting with each other. And my son, back in his early days, he was much more severe. He was just sitting there banging on the slide, repetitively, which is a typical autistic behavior. And I started walking down the path of self pity. Why me? Poor me. Why can't I have a normal kid like all these other mothers? And I started feeling sorry for myself, to be quite honest. Um, but then I remembered common humanity because of my self compassion practice. And I thought, now don't take this the wrong way, okay? But I thought, I looked around at the other kids on the playground, the other mothers, and I said, Kristin, you're assuming all these mothers are going to have perfectly good relationships with their kids and these kids will grow up to live happy, wonderful lives. Well, honestly, some of these kids might grow up to be drug addicts or, get in abusive relationships or end up in prison. I mean, I had no idea, but here I am assuming perfection in the lives of all these other families. And in fact, when I thought about it, that was a totally wrong assumption. And in that moment, it was amazing. I could feel myself switch from feeling isolated from the other mothers to feeling deeply connected to them in the experience of motherhood. I mean, every single mother and father on the planet has challenges with their children, sometimes big, sometimes small, but nonetheless, it's an inherent part of being a parent. So when I remember that, everything changed for me. And that's also a big reason why self-compassion is not the same as self-pity. Self-pity is poor me. Self-compassion is, well, life is difficult for everyone, including me. So we don't shut ourselves out of the circle of compassion, but we don't just focus on ourselves either.
That's amazing. And by opening to that shared common human experience, we're
Yeah.
able to alleviate that self pity and then also simultaneously and even more powerfully connect to others in ways
Yes.
we just simply can't if we think we're isolated, right?
Absolutely. Like some people think the term self is in self compassion, that it's self centered. Well, there's really no more self focused, self absorbed state than beating yourself up with self criticism, right? You aren't thinking about anyone else. But once we kind of relate to ourselves with a greater sense of kindness and connectedness, then we aren't so self focused, right? We're just saying, hey, I'm suffering. We're all suffering. This is part of the experience. And it's really, to some extent, it's okay. It's painful, but this is normal. And so it really takes the focus off the self.
Amazing.
Mm.
Let's go back to kindness then. And if you could share
Okay.
maybe a story or some whatever comes to mind as a meaningful way to kind of go deeper into kindness, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, well, kindness is absolutely key, right? So kindness is really, you might say, the healing balm of self-compassion. kindness is what wraps around suffering, our pain, the suffering of failure, the suffering of, again, getting a diagnosis or something happening. When we embrace our suffering with kindness, we actually rest in the kindness holding the pain. And so what it does is it doesn't make the pain go away. It's very important. Kindness is not like thrown at pain to make it go away, because pain is there. We have to accept that with mindfulness. It's just there. But kindness, we soothe and comfort ourselves while we're experiencing pain. We have a saying in our mindful self-compassion program, a program I've developed to teach self-compassion. The saying is, we give ourselves compassion not to feel better, but because we feel bad, right? So kindness is, just think of a mother with her sick child with the flu, kind of, caressing her head and maybe putting a cool cloth on her forehead. She knows the flu is going to be there. It's not going to go away more quickly. She's not pushing out the flu, but she's holding her daughter in kindness, which makes it bearable. And that's what self-compassion does, and that's why self-compassion is linked to all sorts of positive emotions, like happiness and optimism and, savoring and joy, because kindness is a very positive emotion that we generate in the face of suffering. So it's really quite remarkable, I think, the power we have to transform our own experience.
I love it. And I love the metaphor of the mother with her child, or father with her child, or his child rather, and just that you said this in the intro, or the initial part as well, of just the kindness we extend to others, and how do we give that to ourselves, right?
That's right. And most of us are actually pretty good at being kind to others, at least those in our in-group. We struggle a little more, people in other groups, racial, political, ethnic groups, okay. But at least the people we care about in our lives, we know what to say. A lot of people think, oh, I don't know how to be compassionate to myself. I don't even know what I would begin to say to myself. But you do know, because you know what to say when your friend is suffering. You know what to do. You give your friend a hug, or tell them you love them, or that it's okay and that you're there for them and you support them. So we have all these skills in place, and really the only trick is remembering and also giving yourself permission, very important, to use those skills really with yourself.
So good. Well, how about mindfulness? Let's go to mindfulness, and then I want to explore some other particular ideas. But give us a little more insight into the mindfulness side of things.
Right. So, all right. So, as I mentioned briefly, mindfulness entails being able to be with our experience as it is without resisting it. Right. When we don't have mindfulness, which is actually most of the time, we bang our head against a wall of reality. So not only have I failed, I shouldn't have failed, and God damn it, and we get really upset. We work ourselves in a tizzy over something that already happened, right? It's like we don't want to believe it. We don't want to accept the fact that something did happen like that, so we make it worse for ourselves. There's a saying, suffering equals pain times resistance, right? So when we aren't mindful, when we resist our pain, we make it that much worse. So with mindfulness, like I said, we turn toward our suffering, whether it's because we've done something that we regret, or we failed in some way, or something just very difficult happens. And by accepting it, first of all, we're decreasing our suffering right there by not resisting it. But also, it's like, if you aren't aware that you're suffering, you can't give yourself compassion. And some people what do you mean, am I not aware I'm suffering? Like, it's pretty obvious when I'm suffering, isn't it? But actually, it's not. It's interesting. Often, first of all, if our suffering comes from our own self-criticism, that voice has often been a quiet whisper in the ear for so long, we don't even notice it's happening anymore. Or we go straight into problem-solving mode when things are difficult. We're trying to fix it, make the problem go away. So just the simple phrase, and I use this a lot with myself, this is really hard. That's mindfulness. Bringing awareness to the fact that this is really hard. And when you say that and you validate your pain mindfully, not in a melodramatic way, but just acknowledging it, that's what opens the door for the compassion to arise.
So good. And that was one of the ideas I wanted to explore as well, was the suffering equals pain times resistance.
Yes.
And what a great model. The
Yeah.
pain is present, this is there,
That's
but it's
right.
our resistance to it
That's
that
right.
multiplies the pain we're going to experience. What a beautiful insight.
Exactly. Yeah. When you're stuck in traffic and you're late for an important meeting, yeah, it's painful. It's not good. But when we resist the fact and get really upset and frustrated by that fact, it just makes it worse. We've all experienced this, right? And so the same applies for our own personal suffering as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, so good. Amazing. Well, this is great. So we went through self-kindness, common humanity, mindfulness, and
Yes.
tell us about the noting practice.
Noting practice is a classic mindfulness practice. Okay, so basically, it's a tool that helps us maintain mindfulness when we're lost in the dramatic storyline of a situation of our emotions, right? So, I'll tell you another story. This is really not a self-flattering story, and people are going to think, "Oh my God, she practices self-compassion," but I need it because I'm human, right? So I was at the zoo with my son Rowan, and we were watching a bird show. Okay, it's a kids' bird show, and so we're sitting there, and he's being pretty disruptive. He's kind of talking. He wasn't being well behaved, but he's autistic, and it was hard for him. And so he was squirming in his seat, and the woman in front of us turned around, and I swear, gave my son the evil eye, like a really nasty look, like shut up look. And if anyone treats my son poorly, I become Mama Bear, right? So I was just Mama Bear was triggered, really, really upset. And Rowan said, "Mommy, who's that?" The woman you turn around, and I said, "This is the bit that's not that self-flattering." I said, "She's and I used a name that started with B, and it wasn't Bear." Okay, not exactly mindful parenting moment, but a human moment. And so after the show ended, she, started really getting angry at me. And how dare you say that? And I found myself starting to get angry back, and we were escalating. And then, my noting practice, the habit came up, and I said, "I am so angry right now." And of course, she was like, "Yeah, tell me something I don't know." But for me, instead of being lost in the anger, that simple ability to step outside myself and say, "I am angry," and that gave me that little bit of space I needed to de-escalate and get myself out of the situation. So, that's kind of the power of noting. It allows us ourselves to be, yeah, to be that little bit more objective, have a little more space so we can choose to respond to a situation rather than just reacting.
That's so good, and thank you for sharing. I think I figured out what the word was. Uh,
Yeah.
the noting reminds me of Dan Siegel is the one who introduced me to the idea of naming it to tame it. So
Yes, that's
name it to
right.
tame it. So that's the same basic idea.
Yeah, and
Let's
there's research actually that shows that when you name difficult emotions, the amygdala gets less active. So it really does work.
It's amazing. So what are we doing there? We're basically moving from the amygdala and kind of all of that up into the prefrontal cortex and just
Yeah, I guess
soothing it.
so. Yeah, right. So we aren't so triggered, because when you're triggered, you are lost.
Mm-hmm.
All that's happening is threat, 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 fight, 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 flee, 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 right? And then when we know it, we bring a little objectivity to it, it's also a form of perspective taking, right? You're looking in at yourself from a kind of outside point of view, and that engages the prefrontal
That's
cortex.
cool.
And yeah.
Yeah, so kind of the
Mhm.
witness perspective, the observer perspective we're
Yes,
cultivating in our meditation practice,
that's
but to
right.
be able to do that in real time when we
Yes.
find ourselves being,
Yeah.
flown down that river, right?
Flown down that well-worn groove. Yeah.
Yeah, so good. Um, okay, another idea that I loved in your book is the idea of resetting expectations. So
Mm,
this idea that you have a really funny story about when we were born, we weren't given this contract that says, okay, everything's going to go perfectly,
that's
It's
right. Yeah,
absurd.
yeah.
So talk to us about resetting expectations.
Yeah, well, that's kind of again tying into the common humanity, right? That we act as if, God has broken a contract when something goes wrong, right? This wasn't supposed to happen, and that's where we get really messed up, because we get angry at the fact that we fail. We feel, I should not have failed. And if you kind of look at that, that when we're self-criticizing ourselves is actually feels less vulnerable to say, I should have gotten it right, which means that theoretically it was possible to get it right, than to admit that, we're vulnerable human beings and we will get it wrong. And that's part of what it means to, live the life that we actually did sign up for, which is the human life, not the superhuman life. So really, resetting our expectations is just, and it's very important to say, it's not like giving up. It's not like you stop striving to make healthy change at all, right? It just means that you acknowledge that you will fail and you acknowledge that you are imperfect. And what that does is, the research is pretty overwhelming now. It shows it actually increases motivation. Because when we reset our expectations, when we fail, it's not devastating. It's not the end of the world, which means we can learn from our failure, and we all know failure is the best teacher. We can admit we failed, right? And we can pick ourselves up and try again. And the research shows we are more likely to do that and more likely to keep trying after failure than people who are self-critical, right? If you just slam yourself with criticism when you fail, you undermine your self-confidence. And basically, you become afraid of failure. Of course, you're afraid of failure. Who wants to face the consequences if you fail of your own self-criticism? And you stop trying and you give up much more easily, right? So, it's a very important point, because a lot of people think that somehow we're lowering our standards, or we aren't, we think perfectionistic striving actually kind of works. Well, and by the way, it works to some extent. People wouldn't do it if it didn't work at all. But it has really bad consequences. What happens when you do fail, right? And you become so stressed and burned out with that striving that, again, you actually undermine your ability to do your best.
So powerful.
Yeah.
And you just tied in two of the other ideas I wanted to explore.
Okay.
Failure, and,
Yes.
and you used a phrase there that I loved, of it's really life's apprenticeship.
Uh-huh.
And then you also talk about self-efficacy as
Yes.
it relates to, as self-compassion relates to self-efficacy, and then kind of vice versa.
Right.
Let's go to the self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, tell us what self-efficacy is, and then please tell us how self-compassion supports us in cultivating it.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so self-efficacy, it's, the more common word would be self-confidence, the belief that you can do it, the feeling that I'm effective and I can accomplish the task I set before me, right? And again, research and motivation shows that self-efficacy or self-confidence is one of the most important predictors of achieving your goals. Right, so it's a famous series of studies where they pitted two wrestlers in a wrestling match who were exactly the same equal skill. And the one who won was always the one who had a greater sense of self-efficacy, who believed in himself the most. So with self-compassion, I think a really good metaphor to use, what you're doing with self-compassion, is you're being a supportive coach. Okay, so think about two different ways you're a coach. Let's say coaching your, teenage boys' baseball team. Okay, so the coach has two ways to motivate his players. The first is with very harsh criticism, the type we use with ourselves. Let's say his team loses the game, and he says, "I'm ashamed of you. You're losers. You'll never amount to anything." Right? Which makes you cringe,
Exactly.
But think about it. We often say the exact same thing to ourselves in the exact same harsh tone. I'm ashamed. I'm a loser. We're really hard on ourselves. So think of how effective that coach will be at motivating his players versus the coach that says, "Oh man, well, it happens to everyone. You're still a great team. I'm still here for you." But the coach wouldn't stop there if he's a good coach. The coach would say, "Hey, this bit didn't go so well. Let's do some extra practices, and we'll bring in some specialists to teach you something. But I'm here to support you. I believe in you, and I'm here to support you." So when we can be that kind, supportive coach with ourselves, you might call it an inner ally as opposed to an inner enemy. That's going to help us believe in ourselves, because we have our own back. That's what self-compassion does. It means we have our own back. And that's going to make us much more confident that we can achieve our goals. And in fact, the research shows it helps us achieve our goals. So Yeah.
That's amazing. Is there any other cool research that you'd like to share?
Gosh, there's so much cool
Yeah, I
research.
know.
Um, well, actually, maybe I'll talk. Talk a little bit about the research on motivation. But one area we haven't touched on, which is really important, is the role of self-compassion in relationships. Again, a lot of people think that self-compassion is selfish. I should just, slavishly serve others, think only about others, have compassion for others, help others, and not give any of that to myself, right? Because that's selfish. Well, in fact, what the research shows, actually, what the colleague did a study of people in romantic partnerships, right? Who'd been together for at least a year. And what we did is we had one partner fill out my self-compassion scale, a scale I developed to measure self-compassion, and the other person rate their partner's relationship behavior. Okay, so more self-compassionate people were rated by their partners as being much more giving, much more caring, much more intimate, much less controlling, much less likely to use anger to try to get their way in a relationship. And people were much more satisfied in their relationship with self-compassionate partners. Okay, and it makes complete sense. Again, if we unpackage it, if you expect your partner to meet all your needs, right, as we do, right, all our needs exactly how we want them met, exactly when we want them met, we're going to get angry and irritable when things aren't going well. We're going to tend to want to blame our partners instead of facing our own self-blame. And again, self-criticism is a really self-focused state. But if I can nurture myself, if I can meet a lot of my own needs, a lot of my own emotional needs, if I can give myself the support I need, I have much more resources available to give to others, right? So again, self-compassion is not selfish. It actually gives you, it increases your ability to be there and give to others.
Oh, that's so good. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's one of those paradoxes, right? That we have this idea that
That's
it's
right.
self-indulgent, it's selfish, etc. And it's
Yeah,
just, as you said, we have more resources, more energy to be able to give that we just don't
right.
have if we're not taking care of ourselves. And
That's right.
um,
And that's another one. You said the word self-indulgent. A lot of people think, I'm having a hard day. To be self-compassionate, I'm going to go ahead and eat that entire box of Oreos, right? And so people think that they need to be hard on themselves so that they, can do things like exercise or eat well or do whatever, get to work on time. And again, the research shows the exact opposite. So if you care about yourself and you don't want to suffer, just like, a compassionate parent who cares about her child and doesn't want her child to suffer, that parent's going to say, eat your vegetables, go to bed on time, do your homework. And the same with ourselves. So people who are self-compassionate engage in healthier behaviors. They go to the doctor more often. They're more likely to practice safe sex. They eat better. They have less disordered eating. They're more likely to eat until they're full. Just have healthier eating behaviors. So a lot of research showing that it counters self-indulgence. And again, if you care, you're going to take care of yourself.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, this is amazing. I'm really excited to share this wisdom. And I like to wrap up our chats with two questions. One,
Okay.
a big part of my work in optimal living is to help people discover and practice what I call their fundamentals. So, kind of those self compassion
Right.
um, fundamentals that help us stay plugged in, whether it's exercise, nutrition, meditation, etc. Can you
Yes.
share with us some of the practices that you've integrated into your life that help you from a general perspective stay plugged in?
Yeah, and also if your listeners are interested, I have a bunch of practices on my website that people can try out for themselves. You don't have to take my word for it. But there's various meditations I do which help engender self-compassion. There's one actually I've been told that this is one of the favorites of people who listen to the meditations on my website, called Soften, Soothe, and Allow, and it's a meditation, but it's a little different. You might say it's something you do when you're really upset. It's a great thing to do at 3 a.m. when you're in bed and you can't sleep because you're so upset about a situation. And what you do is you basically start by labeling the emotion, figuring out what is it I'm feeling. oh, I see, I'm feeling sadness. You find it in your body. Where do I feel that sadness? And then you soften physically around the felt sensation in your body. And then you soothe yourself because it hurts, right? So that might mean like putting a gentle hand on that part of your body, saying kind words. For me, does not work for everyone, but for me, I like to use diminutives of myself. So I might say, "Oh, sweetheart, this is so hard." Some like the type of language I would use with my son. I tend to use that with myself. And then you just allow it to be there. So you go through this kind of circle of softening around the emotion, soothing yourself because it hurts, and allowing it to be there. So practices like that really combine mindfulness, not resisting difficult emotions, and soothing yourself because they are difficult, are really, really powerful. So I use that one all the time. The other one I use all the time is something called the self-compassion break, which is also my website. I've got a little MP3 of it, where basically what you do is you start with some sort of a soothing, supportive touch. The reason we emphasize touch so much is because there are 3 universal triggers of compassion, right? They've done this around the world. Dr. Keltner's research at UC Berkeley shows this. The 3 triggers are warmth, gentle touch, and soothing vocalizations. Okay, so think of a kitten purring, cuddle up next to mommy, right? This is part of being a mammal, these triggers. So if you use some sort of supportive touch, it could be your hands on your heart or up in your cheeks or wherever feels soothing for you. So you adopt that soothing touch, and then you just say phrases that remind you of the 3 components of self-compassion. So the first phrase is actually mindfulness. You have to be aware of your suffering. So the first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering. You just, wow. And it's amazing. Often that changes everything. Just saying, oh yeah, instead of being lost in the storyline, you think, this is a moment of suffering. This hurts, right? And then the second phrase is suffering is part of life. This is reminding ourselves of common humanity. This isn't abnormal. Everyone suffers. There's nothing to be upset about the fact that it's happening. Failure and perfection, this is what it means to be human. And then the last phrase is just, may I be kind to myself. So really using any language or giving yourself what you need to be kind to yourself in that moment. And this is a practice you can do, it takes just a few minutes whenever you're really struggling. You say the self-compassion break, and a lot of people report from our workshops that it's really, really effective in their daily life.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And we'll definitely make sure we link to your site and reference those particular practices.
Right.
Wonderful. And then the last question I like to frame is, if you could only share one piece of wisdom for people aspiring to optimize their lives and actualize their potential, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
Well, I'm afraid this is going to sound trite, but yeah, just hold everything in love, right? So when love holds suffering, it manifests as compassion. When love holds positive events, positive emotions, it manifests as joy. There's nothing we can experience as human beings on this earth that can't be held in love, or you can use another word if you don't like the word love, tenderness, care. And really, if you start practicing that, no matter what happens, positive, negative, or neutral, you start resting your awareness in the care and kindness and love that holds the experience. And then that becomes a mindset you carry around in the world, which affects not only yourself, but every single person you come into contact with. And it's always there. It never deserts you. It is always available in the worst of times. It is available, and it will get you through tough times. I know that personally. It'll get you through when you need it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your vulnerability, your authenticity, and your self-compassion, just the embodiment of these ideas. And again, thank you. If people want to learn more about you, where's the best place?
Yeah, just Google self-compassion. My website comes up at selfcompassion.org, and it's got info about me, and I do teach workshops all over the world, really, and I've got book and CD set, but a lot of free stuff on my website. You don't have to buy anything, right? There's a free, you can download the PDFs of the research, and there's exercises, guided meditations. So if you start there, it'll be a really good first step to find out more.
Fantastic. We'll put a link to it, but for those listening not in front of the computer, it's self-compassion.org.
That's right.
And we'll have links right next to this video, or audio rather. And Kristin, once again, thank you. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. It was great fun talking to you.
We hope you enjoyed this Optimal Living interview. Please visit brianjohnson.me for more.